Peace and greetings. In our last conversation, we introduced the concept of psychoneuroimmunology, the science of how the mind, the nervous system, and the immune system communicate with and shape each other. We established that chronic stress doesn't just make you feel bad, it measurably alters your biological capacity to fight infection, regulate inflammation, and maintain immune coherence. Today, I want to take that framework and apply it to something specific, something that a lot of people lived through or lost people to, but may not have fully examined through this lens. I want to talk about the crack cocaine era, and I want to talk about COVID-19, and I want to show you how, through the lens of psychoneuroimmunology, these two events are not separate chapters in Black history. They are part of the same biological story. Let me be clear from the start. I am not here to criminalize, pathologize, or shame anyone who was touched by the crack epidemic. I am a clinician. I am a Black man. I understand that what happened in Black communities during the 1980s and 1990s was not simply a moral failure or a personal weakness. It was the convergence of a highly addictive substance, deliberately made affordable and accessible in Black urban communities, with pre-existing conditions of poverty, fragmentation, racialized stress, and community disinvestment. The response from the government was not treatment, it was criminalization. Black people were not seen as people in pain, they were seen as criminals to be contained, and the consequences of that response, mass incarceration, family separation, community devastation, added additional layers of trauma on top of trauma that was already there. But here is what I want us to examine today, the biological layer. Because the crack epidemic didn't just devastate Black communities socially and economically, it did something measurable to Black bodies, something that the science of psychoneuroimmunology now allows us to trace. Here is what the research shows. Crack cocaine is a powerful stimulant of the sympathetic nervous system. When used chronically, it produces sustained overdrive of what scientists call the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This is the body's central stress response system. It is the same system that gets dysregulated under chronic racialized stress. It is the same system that governs cortisol production, immune regulation, and inflammatory response. When crack cocaine chronically activates this system, it doesn't simply return to baseline when drug use stops. The research shows that HPA axis dysregulation is maintained in people with cocaine dependence, meaning the stress response system becomes structurally altered. The body learns a new abnormal baseline. Cortisol rhythms are disrupted. Natural killer cell function is suppressed. Low-grade chronic inflammation becomes the body's new normal. Now hold that thought, because approximately 20 to 30 years after the peak of the crack epidemic, after a generation of Black people had their HPA axis chronically dysregulated, their immune systems structurally compromised, their communities fragmented, their families incarcerated, their nervous systems shaped by violence, hypervigilance, loss, and grief, a novel coronavirus arrived. And that virus, COVID-19, disproportionately killed people with compromised immune function, people with chronic inflammation, people with hypertension, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease, all conditions directly linked to long-term HPA axis dysregulation and chronic stress. People whose natural killer cells had been suppressed, people whose bodies had been running on stress hormones for decades. Black Americans were hospitalized from COVID-19 at nearly 5 times the rate of white Americans. Black Americans died at disproportionate rates, and we were told this was about poverty, about essential worker status, about pre-existing conditions. All of that is true, but it is incomplete because it doesn't ask the deeper question, where did those pre-existing conditions come from? What produced that biological vulnerability? And is it coincidental? I'm going to let you sit with that word. Is it coincidental that a virus arrived that exploited precisely the biological vulnerabilities concentrated in Black bodies after generations of racialized stress and a drug epidemic that the government chose to criminalize rather than treat? I'm not asking you to reach a conclusion. I am asking you to examine the pattern. This is what psychoneuroimmunology teaches us. The mind and the body are not separate. What happens to a community, socially, politically, economically, psychologically, happens in the bodies of the people in that community. The trauma is not just felt, it is encoded in the HPA axis, in cortisol rhythms, in immune cell function, in inflammatory markers, in the very biological architecture of the next generation. The crack epidemic was